Hello, dears. Tonight's story follows Alaric, a wounded human traveler saved from bandits by Kavra, Ruska, and Nemi, three orc huntresses who ask for his seed and name. What begins as panic in Black Pine Pass becomes a fierce choice of hearth, memory, and belonging beside their hidden fire.
The road into Black Pine Pass had the decency to look dangerous long before it tried to kill Alaric Venn, which was more warning than most roads gave, and considerably less than a sensible man would have required. It narrowed after the last milestone, shedding the wheel ruts of honest traffic for two pale scars through frost-bent grass, then sank between stands of pine so old and close that noon became a greenish dusk. The air smelled of resin, wet stone, and old animal tracks. Somewhere above, a raven complained at him with the tone of a creditor. Alaric adjusted the strap of his pack and told the raven that if it had a better route to Halliford, it was welcome to draw him a map. The raven did not. He was 34 years old, which was old enough to know that talking to birds did not improve a man's odds, and young enough to do it anyway when no one was near enough to hear. His left knee ached from a winter campaign 14 years behind him. His boots had been resoled twice and were considering retirement, and the pack on his shoulder carried the tools by which he had kept himself fed since leaving the militia. A folding rule of polished horn, a carpenter's scribe, a small kit for mending locks and hinges, 3 copper rivets wrapped in cloth, and the cedar-handled awl his father had given him when his hands were still too soft to hold it properly. Against his ribs, tucked inside his coat where rain and thieves would have to work for it, was a narrow leather ledger embossed with the fading words Venn and Son. He had not been a son in that shop for a long time. He had not been much of anything that fit neatly into a ledger, if he was being honest, but the book still carried his father's cramped figures, his mother's careful notes in the margins, and the names of people who had once owed the Venns money for honest work. Most of those people were dead, moved away, or better at forgetting than he was. He was carrying it to Halliford because his cousin Merrick had written that a place might be found for him in a counting-house if he arrived before the thaw. A stool, a desk, perhaps a window. Respectable work. Work that did not require sleeping in roadside shrines or arguing with ravens. He was not looking for love. He was not looking for glory. He was not looking to be taught a lesson by the wilderness in the form of several muscular women with axes, though the gods were apparently feeling inventive that week. He was trying to reach Halliford with his ledger, his tools, and his skin attached. The pass grew quieter the deeper he walked. It was not the comfortable quiet of snowfall or the soft hush of a well-built chapel. It was the kind of quiet that made a man's ears strain until every sound became suspicious. The wind moved at the treetops, but not on the road. A fox track crossed the mud and vanished. Twice Alaric found boot prints beside it where no boot prints should have been, half hidden under scuffed pine needles. Too large for children, too careless for trappers. He stopped at a bend where the road passed beneath a shoulder of grey rock. A thin stream ran beside it, bright and fast, and a deadfall of pine branches narrowed the way ahead. It might have come down in last week's storm. It might have been helped. Oh, splendid, he murmured. A natural inconvenience with opinions. He stood there too long. That was the first mistake he would admit to later, though not the last. His second was putting a hand over the place beneath his coat where the ledger rested. His third was turning back exactly as the first man stepped from behind a tree with a knife in his hand and a smile that had made peace with disappointing mothers. There were 5 of them. Alaric noticed that because fear made an accountant of him. 2 ahead, 2 behind, 1 above on the slope with a short bow already drawn. Their clothes were mismatched, their faces hungry in the particular way of men who had learned to call laziness misfortune, and the man with the knife had a red scarf tied around his wrist like a banner from a very small and unpleasant kingdom. "Road's closed," the scarfed man said. Alaric looked at the deadfall, then at the knife, then at the bow. His mouth, which had never understood the value of silence, said, "It does seem to be suffering from administrative difficulties." The man blinked. One of the others laughed. not because it was funny, but because laughing was easier than thinking. The bowstring creaked. "Pack?" said the scarfed man. "Before I continue, I'd like to make an announcement. I'll be sharing some really steamy, uncensored orc stories on my Patreon page that I couldn't post on YouTube. You can find the details in the description. Warning, the content is really steamy." "Yes," Alaric said. "I have one." "Give it." "Ah, that is less convenient." The blow came from behind, a fist or club against his shoulder, hard enough to knock him to one knee. Pain flashed white. The pack was dragged half off him before he twisted and hooked his elbow through the strap. He was not a heroic man, but he had owned very little for a very long time, and poverty made a miser of instinct. He kicked backward, caught someone's shin, and heard a curse. The bandit with the red scarf sighed as if Alaric had disappointed him personally. "Don't make this ugly." It was ugly when I arrived. The next blow split his lip. He tasted blood and mud. Someone stomped on his hand. The world narrowed to boot leather, pine needles, and the frantic knowledge that the ledger was still inside his coat. They wanted the pack first, then pockets, then anything else that could be sold. They would find it. The idea of his father's book in those hands, pages ripped for kindling or used to wrap stolen cheese, filled him with an anger so precise it burned cleaner than fear. He curled around his chest. "Look at him," said one of the bandits. "Got something tucked in there?" "No," Alaric said, which was not the cleverest lie ever attempted, but had the advantage of sincerity. They pried at his coat. He drove his forehead into a man's knee and was rewarded with a howl and a kick to the ribs. He did not win. He did not come close to winning. He managed only to be troublesome, which in that moment felt like the last scrap of dignity available to him. He would not beg. That was not courage, exactly. It was a bitter little decision made, because begging would not save him, and because some part of him, small as an ember under ash, refused to give these men the pleasure of hearing his voice break. The bowman shouted something. Not a warning. A question cut short. The forest answered. It did not answer like men answered. It answered with the crack of a body hitting bark, with the hiss of an arrow that did not belong to the bowman, with a roar that seemed to come from 3 directions at once, and made every bandit freeze in place as if the trees had suddenly remembered they were ancient and angry. The man on the slope tumbled through brush and landed on the road with an expression of astonishment that might have been funny if Alaric had not been busy trying to breathe. A shape moved between the pines, then another, then a third. For the rest of his life, Alaric would insist that the fight had lasted perhaps 20 heartbeats. He would also admit, under pressure and after wine, that he had understood almost none of it. One moment a bandit was lifting a boot toward his ribs, the next a green hand closed around the man's collar and threw him into the deadfall with enough force to make the branches leap. An axe haft cracked across a wrist. A spear butt swept legs from under another man. The scarfed bandit turned to run and found a curved blade under his chin, held by a tall orc woman whose face was as calm as a locked door. She was green. Not the muddy grey-green of fireside horror stories. Not the corpse-pale tint cheap illustrators gave monsters in children's pamphlets, but a deep, living green like moss after rain and the first leaves of spring under shadow. She was taller than any man on the road, with black hair braided close to her skull and bone beads woven near her temples. Scars crossed one forearm in pale lines. Her eyes were amber and very still. "Down," she said to the scarfed man in common. He dropped. The second orc woman was broader through the shoulder and shorter by a hand, which still made her tall enough to loom over Alaric like a judgment. Her skin was brighter, a vivid emerald marked with dark tattoos at throat and wrist. She had one bandit pinned under a knee while she searched his belt with visible disappointment, as though annoyed that he carried nothing worth confiscating after all the trouble of being beaten. Her tusks were small and sharp, her copper-red hair cut to her jaw. When the man beneath her groaned, she thumped him once with the back of her knuckles, and he reconsidered consciousness. The third stood farther back, bow lowered, watching everything. She was the leanest, with long silver-black hair tied in a cord and eyes the color of storm water. A cloak of mottled hide hung from her shoulders, and she had an arrow nocked again before Alaric realized she had drawn. She looked not at the bandits, but at him, or more precisely at the way his bloody hands clutched his coat closed. Alaric lay in the mud, sucking air through his teeth, and thought, with the faint, distant clarity of a man whose body had decided to complain later, that the stories had left out several important details. The calm one looked down at him. "You live?" "Provisionally," he managed. The fierce one snorted. "Too many words. He lives." The quiet one said nothing. Her gaze moved from his face to his chest, to the ledger beneath the coat, to his split lip, then back to his face. Alaric had never before felt as if silence could take inventory. The calm one crouched. Even crouched, she was enormous. "Can you stand?" "Historically, yes." Her brow twitched. "Now?" "That is a more complicated question." The fierce one laughed, sharp and unwilling, then seemed irritated at herself for doing it. The leader slid an arm under Alaric's shoulders with a care that did not ask permission, because it had already decided he would not enjoy collapsing. He hissed as his ribs protested. She paused at once. "Broken. Only my pride, I think, and possibly several opinions. Ribs bruised," the quiet one said, her first words soft and exact. "Not broken." Alaric turned his head toward her. "You can tell from there?" She looked at the way he held himself. "You are complaining too evenly." "That is disturbingly perceptive." The leader helped him sit against a rock. Around them, the road had become an exhibit in poor decisions. 3 bandits lay unconscious. One knelt with hands bound in his own belt. The bowman whimpered into pine needles. The scarfed man was very still beneath the leader's blade, and trying not to breathe in a way that drew attention. "What do you want with them?" the leader asked Alaric. It took him a moment to understand the question. No one, in his experience, had ever paused in the aftermath of violence to ask the bruised man for policy. "I was hoping never to see them again." "Good." She looked at the fierce one. "Ruska." Ruska grinned. The bandits were stripped of knives, coin, boots, pride, and directions. Then they were sent limping back down the road with their hands tied in front of them and a promise from Ruska that if she smelled them in black pine again, she would remove something they would miss more than boots. Alaric believed her. The bandits believed her more. When the road was clear, the 3 orc women gathered his scattered belongings. The quiet one lifted the ledger from where it had slipped half free of his coat during the struggle. She did not open it. She brushed mud from the cover with her thumb and handed it back to him as if returning a bone to a grave. He took it with both hands. "Thank you." She inclined her head once. The leader watched that exchange. Something settled in her expression, not softness precisely, but decision. Alaric was too busy being grateful, concussed, and increasingly aware that his left side hurt like a church bell to notice that his life had just altered course more completely than any map could show. "My name is Kavra of the Thistle Moon," the leader said. "These are Ruska and Nemi, my hunt sisters." "Alaric Ven," he said, "of no impressive moon." Ruska looked him over. "No, clearly." "Ruska," Kavra said, without looking away from him. "What? He is narrow." "I prefer economical," Alaric said, then coughed and wished he had not. Kavra stood. "We make camp off the road. You bleed. You will come." It was phrased with the absolute confidence of weather. Alaric considered several responses. "I am very grateful, but I should continue to Halliford. I can manage. Please do not carry me into the forest, large armed stranger." What came out was, "Will I?" Kavra looked at him, then at the red smear on his mouth, then at his shaking knees. Ruska picked up his pack with 2 fingers. He will. Nemi stepped behind him before he could attempt dignity. Between one breath and the next, Alaric found himself lifted, not thrown over a shoulder like a sack, which he appreciated, but carried with one of his arms braced over Kavra's shoulders, while Ruska walked with his pack, and Nemi erased their trail behind them. The road disappeared through trees. His boots dragged once. Kavra adjusted her grip so they did not drag again. He should have been terrified. He was in a sensible corner of himself. But terror had been asked to share quarters with exhaustion, pain, and a humiliating awareness that these women smelled of wood smoke, leather, cold air, and crushed pine, which was inconveniently pleasant for people who might be kidnapping him. "Are you kidnapping me?" he asked after a while. "No," Kavra said. "Oh, good. We are taking you. That distinction seems to be doing heavy lifting." Ruska made the sharp laugh again. Nemi, somewhere behind them, was silent as falling snow. Their camp lay in a hollow above the stream, hidden by rock and thorn. It had been made before, or made so often by people who knew what they were doing that it seemed to belong there. A ring of stones blackened by old fire, a hide stretched between two pines. Bundles hung high away from animals, a bed of cedar boughs thick enough to make the ground almost hospitable. Kavra sat him down and began cleaning his face with water, cold enough to make him invent a new prayer. Ruska built a fire in less time than he would have spent looking for dry twigs. Nemi knelt at his side with a small pouch of bitter-smelling paste and eyes that missed nothing. The paste stung like a wasp with a grudge. Alaric jerked. "Hold still," Nemi said. "I was considering dancing." "No. Direct. I admire that." She pressed 2 fingers near his ribs. He made a noise he would later describe as tactical breathing. Ruska looked over from the fire. "Soft," she said. "Bruised," he corrected. "Both." Kavra tore a strip of clean cloth with her teeth and rapped his knuckles. Her hands were large, the nails short, the movements efficient. She asked where he was going, and he told her Halliford. She asked why, and he said work. She asked what work, and he said counting house if Fortune was bored enough to notice him. She asked what he counted. "Other people's money," he said, "ideally with enough accuracy that they keep feeding me." Ruska frowned. "You hunt numbers?" "In a manner of speaking." "Do they run?" "Constantly." That earned him another unwilling laugh. Kavra's mouth did not smile, but some sternness eased around her eyes. Nemi finished tying a bandage and sat back on her heels. "Ledger matters," she said. Alaric looked down. The book lay beside him, wrapped now in his coat, the cover drying near the fire. It did. Still does. He swallowed. "Yes." Kavra watched him for a moment, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. "You held it while they beat you." It seemed rude to hand over the family business to men with no appreciation for bookkeeping. "Name book," Nemi said. "In a way." Kavra sat across from him on a flat stone. Firelight moved over the planes of her face. Without the urgency of the road, he saw details the stories never gave orcs because stories made monsters simpler than people. The faint scar at the edge of her jaw, the blue thread tied around one braid, the careful repair on the sleeve of her dark green hunting tunic, the way she listened fully, with the whole weight of herself. Ruska wore a sleeveless leather jerkin over a short wool dress belted high for movement, her muscular legs bare above wrapped boots despite the cold, as if weather had failed to impress her. Nemi's cloak had patches stitched in 3 different hands, and beneath it her tunic was dyed the soft brown of wet bark. All 3 wore knives, beads, small charms of tooth and carved antler. None wore the iron plates or skull ornaments human stories loved to give them. Those stories had been lazy. He was beginning to resent that on artistic grounds. "You owe life debt," Kavra said. Alaric, who had just taken a cautious sip of broth, stopped with the cup at his mouth. "I beg your pardon?" Your life was taken from death by our hands. Debt stands. Ah. He lowered the cup. Yes, of course. I have. He glanced at his pack, which contained 8 silver marks, 3 bent copper coins, and a heel of bread. Limited funds, but I can work. I mend locks. I repair hinges. I can balance accounts. I once fixed a miller's scale so precisely that he cried, though in fairness he had been drinking. Ruska stared. He thinks debt is coin. I think many debts are coin. Alaric said, It is a popular arrangement. Not this. Kavra said. The air changed. Not dramatically. The fire did not leap. Wolves did not howl. It was worse than that. The 3 women simply became very still, and Alaric felt himself sitting at the edge of a custom older than the road beneath them. Kavra continued, precise as a blade laid flat. Among Thistlemoon, life saved binds breath to breath. We drew you out of death. You will not repay with metal. Metal is dead. Service can be forced. A life debt is honored with life. Alaric waited. His instincts, perhaps sensing an approaching cliff, tried to leave without him. Kavra said, Your debt will be paid with your seed and your name. The silence afterward was so complete that he heard a coal split in the fire. Alaric blinked. I may have struck my head harder than I thought. Ruska folded her arms. He heard. I am hoping I did not. You did. Then I am going to require a second translation. Nemi's gaze did not waver. Children. Yes, Alaric said faintly. That was the fear. Kavra tilted her head. Not fear, honor. I understand that tone suggests I am meant to be honored, and yet my ribs are forming a committee of protest. Ruska snorted. Human males speak when confused. Human males speak when alarmed by sudden reproductive policy. Kavra's brow furrowed. You have no clan wife? No. No promised hearth? No. No children carrying your name. Not to my knowledge, and I feel I would have been informed. Then there is no broken bond. How tidy for everyone except me. Ruska leaned toward Kavra. He is very small for this much noise. I am not small, Alaric said, because a man chose strange hills to die on. I am regionally average. You fell over. I was beaten by 5 men, and then carried. Yes, thank you, I had been present. Nemi's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. Kavra, however, remained serious. We do not take what is not given. That stopped him better than any command could have. He looked at her. She spoke slowly, perhaps because common had to carry a thing it had not been built to hold. Debt stands. We speak claim because truth must be named, but the honoring is not done by force. Seed without willing breath is ash. Name without willing tongue is empty. You will understand before you answer. Answer, he repeated. Yes. When? When you do. He stared at the 3 of them. Kavra calm and certain, Ruska impatient but not cruel, Nemi quiet as the dark between trees. He had been robbed, beaten, rescued, bandaged, fed, and informed in the same evening that his bachelorhood had entered negotiations with an Orc clan. Somewhere in Halliford, a counting stool waited for a man who, at this rate, might never arrive, because destiny had taken him by the collar and dragged him into a thorn hollow. I would like it noted, he said carefully, that my first answer is panic. Kavra nodded. Noted. My second answer is also panic, but with questions. Questions are allowed. Excellent, I have several hundred. Ruska groaned and flopped onto her bedroll. Wake me when he chooses silence. He may never, Nemi said. Alaric pointed at her. She understands me. Nemi looked at him for a long moment. Some wounds speak. That ended the laughter in his throat. He looked down at his bandaged hands. The fire warmed one side of him, while the forest chilled the other. Kavra poured more broth into his cup, and did not ask another question until he drank. He slept poorly. That was not the fault of the cedar boughs, which were more comfortable than they had any right to be, nor of the women, who took watches without drama and moved through the dark with the competence of creatures born knowing where to place their feet. He slept poorly because every time his body began to sink, his mind lifted its head and said, "Your seed and your name," in Kavra's calm voice. It said it while his ribs throbbed. It said it while Ruska muttered in Orcish at the fire. It said it when Nemi crouched at the edge of camp and looked into the trees as if reading the night. At dawn, Alaric made his first attempt to leave. It was not an escape. Escape implied ropes, locked doors, or guards, none of which existed. His pack lay beside him. His boots had been cleaned and set near the fire. His knife had been returned, which suggested either trust or a devastating lack of concern regarding his threat potential. The 3 huntresses were awake but occupied. Kavra checking arrowheads, Ruska skinning 2 hares with unnecessary intensity, Nemi grinding something in a stone bowl. Alaric rose carefully, nearly folded when his ribs reminded him of democracy, and picked up his pack. Kavra did not look up. "You need more rest. I often need many things I do not get. Road is unsafe. I had gathered. We go north. I go south." Ruska glanced at him. "Do you?" "Yes." She looked at his knees. "Far. I dislike the skepticism in this camp." Nemi added something green to the bowl. "He will reach the stream. I will reach considerably farther than the stream." He reached the stream. In his defense, the stream was farther than it looked, and the ground between camp and water had been arranged by a committee of roots. He made it there with his jaw clenched and sweat cold under his shirt, then discovered that bending to fill his flask made bright flecks dance at the edge of his vision. When he straightened, Kavra stood on the opposite bank with his walking stick in her hand. He had not heard her follow. Of course he had not. At that point he suspected Thunder would have difficulty hearing her follow. "That is mine," he said. "You left it." "I was creating an air of casual departure." "You were limping." "Elegantly." She crossed the stream by stepping on stones he had not even noticed. "Alaric Ven, we will not drag you back." "That is comforting. If you walk from us now, you will fall before noon. Bandits may return. Wolves may smell blood. Fever may rise. Your debt will remain unpaid. Your ledger will rot in ditch. And your name will end with you because you were stubborn at a stream." He stared at her. "You have a gift for making concern sound like legal judgment." "It is concern." "I gathered that eventually." She handed him the stick. "Walk if you choose." That was the infuriating part. She meant it. He could see no trap in her face, no hidden threat, no hunger for conquest. She would let him go, and if the wolves took him, she would probably grieve in some stern orc fashion while also considering him an idiot. He looked down at the stream. The water ran fast over dark stones. His reflection looked pale, blood-crusted, and deeply unconvinced of his ability to survive noon. "How far north?" he asked. Kavra's eyes warmed a fraction. 2 days to our winter hunting ground. 5 to Clan Hearth." "I did not agree to a clan hearth." "No. I am agreeing to not dying beside this stream." They asked about his trade. Not politely, not in the human way of filling empty air, but with a focused curiosity that made him feel at once examined and honored. Kavra wanted to know how he judged the strength of wood for a hinge post. Ruska wanted to know why locks could not simply be broken. Nemi asked why he kept the awl wrapped in blue cloth when the point had a leather sheath. "My father wrapped it that way," he said. "Why?" He said tools remember how they are treated. Nemi held out her hand. After a hesitation, he placed the awl in her palm. It looked small there, the cedar handle worn smooth by Ven hands, his father's broad fingers, his own younger clumsy ones, his mother's on the day she had used it to punch holes in a new ledger strap because his father had been ill and pride did not mend leather. Nemi turned it gently. "Good tool," she said. "Old tool. Old can be good. It can also be stubborn, dull, and too sentimental to sell." Her eyes flicked to him. "We were speaking of tool?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and heard Ruska bark a laugh from ahead. At noon on the third day, they found signs of the bandits again. Not the same men, or not only them. Broken branches, a boot print with a triangular nail, ash from a hidden fire. Ruska crouched over the track, and her expression sharpened into something that made Alaric's skin prickle. 6, she said. "Maybe 8. Moving west." "Looking for us?" Alaric asked. "For boots," Ruska said. Kevra studied the trees. "For shame. Men who are shamed by prey become foolish." "I am prey in that sentence, I assume." "You were attacked," Kavra said. "That is not a denial." Nemi knelt beside the ash and touched it. "They follow poorly. Angry." Ruska smiled. "Good. Angry men are loud." The sensible thing, according to Alaric, would have been to avoid them completely. The orcish thing, apparently, was to avoid them while also arranging the forest, so that if they continued, they would regret having feet. Ruska set snares not meant to kill, but to humiliate. Nemi moved through the underbrush, erasing some tracks and leaving others like false invitations. Kavra asked Alaric to help cut thin strips of leather because his hands were skilled, and because, she said, a debt-bound man should learn the shape of dangers around him. "Debt-bound," he repeated. "Yes. Is there perhaps a less ominous term? Life-held. That is worse. Breath-joined. Poetic but somehow alarming." Ruska looked up from tying a bent sapling. "Complaining husband." Alaric nearly cut the leather wrong. "I beg your pardon?" "Not husband," Kavra said. "Not unless chosen." Ruska shrugged. "Future complaining husband." "No one has agreed to future anything. You are still here. I was concussed. Not now. I am bruised. Less. I am surrounded." Ruska grinned. "Yes." Nemi, without looking up, said, "He is also curious." Alaric resented that because it was true. That evening they camped in a shallow cave above a narrow valley. Rain came after dark, cold, and steady, turning the world beyond the cave mouth into silver lines and black shapes. The fire smoked until Ruska swore at it in Orcish and rearranged the stones. Kavra took first watch. Nemi sorted herbs. Alaric sat with the ledger open on his knees for the first time since the attack. The pages smelled faintly of damp leather and old dust. His father's writing marched in columns with the confidence of a man who believed accounts could keep the world from falling apart. Paid in full, partial settlement, Widow Harrow, no charge after storm, Joss Miller still lying. Alaric smiled despite himself at that last note. His mother had written beneath it, "Be kind. He may yet surprise us." Then, in his father's hand, he did not. Kavra sat across from him at the cave mouth, rain silvering the edges of her braids. "You smile at namebook." "My parents argued in margins." "Good place. Margins hold truth." He looked up. "Do orcs keep records?" "Not like that." "How then?" She touched her chest, then her throat. Names carried, debts knotted, births carved on hearthbeams, deaths sung into stone. A clan remembers together, so one mind does not have to hold all grief. Alaric's smile faded. "That sounds heavier and lighter than a book." "Yes." Ruska leaned back against the cave wall, sharpening a knife. "Books burn. So do hearthbeams. Stone doesn't. Songs are forgotten. Not by us." There was no boast in it. Ruska simply said it as fact, and for the first time he wondered what it would feel like to belong to a people so certain they would remember him correctly. Among humans, a man could vanish while still breathing. It had happened to Alaric gradually, through no single tragedy grand enough to sing about. His parents died 2 winters apart. The shop debts grew teeth. The militia forgot his service except when taxes came due. Friends married, moved, made rooms he was welcome to visit but not stay in. He became the useful man passing through, the one who fixed latches and balanced accounts, thanked at doorways and forgotten by supper. He looked down at the ledger. Ven and Son. The son had carried the name like a wrapped tool, preserving it without knowing what to build. "You said children would carry both bloodlines," he said. The words came out before he had measured them. Kavra's gaze shifted to him. Ruska's sharpening slowed. Nemi's hands stilled over her herbs. "Yes," Kavra said. "How does that work? In your clan?" Kavra took time to answer. He was learning that when she paused, it was not because she lacked words, but because she was choosing ones strong enough to carry meaning across the gap between them. When a life debt opens between stranger and clan, the saved one may be invited to hearth. If he or she accepts, the debt is honored by making future where death tried to end it. Sometimes that means children, sometimes adoption of name, sometimes oath bond if bodies cannot or do not choose children. Seed and name is old phrase. It means give what continues. Not only body, not only word, both if both are freely offered. Alaric breathed out slowly. That is not how it sounded. Ruska snorted. Common tongue is thin. It sounded like being informed I had been promoted to stud horse. Ruska considered this. Horse would complain less. Kavra gave her a look. What? True. Despite himself, Alaric laughed, and the cave warmed around it. Kavra's stern mouth softened. Nemi watched him with an expression he could not read, but it no longer felt like inventory. It felt like recognition waiting for him to catch up. No force, Kavra said again. Never. A child made in fear is a wound with legs, a name given under threat curdles. We spoke early because hiding debt is shame. Humans hide nearly everything, Alaric said. Yes, Nemi said. He looked at her. She met his eyes and added, It makes you lonely. The rain filled the silence that followed. He wanted to answer lightly. He had a dozen defenses ready, polished by years of use. Something about weather. Something about enjoying his own company. Something about loneliness being a small price for freedom. But Nemi's words had gone in too cleanly, like a needle through cloth finding the old hole. Yes, he said. No one pitied him. That was important. Ruska did not soften into awkward sympathy. Kavra did not reach for him as if he had become fragile. Nemi simply nodded once, accepting the truth without decorating it. The absence of pity made it possible to breathe. The next morning, the bandits caught up badly. It happened in a slope of birch and wet stone, where mist clung low and every branch dripped. Alaric had just begun to believe the women so thoroughly in control of the world that nothing could touch them. This, he would later think, was his first truly foolish belief of the journey. The world had more teeth than anyone's confidence. An arrow struck the tree beside Kavra's head. She moved before the sound finished, shoving Alaric down behind a boulder. Ruska vanished uphill with a snarl. Nemi's bow sang once, twice. Men shouted from the mist. Stay, Kavra ordered. Alaric stayed. For perhaps 3 breaths. Then a man came sliding down the slope to his left, knife out, eyes wide with the blind luck of someone who had stumbled past better hunters by accident. He saw Alaric behind the boulder and grinned. It was not the scarfed man, but it might as well have been. Same hunger, same assumption that a bruised human on the ground was an easy thing to take. Alaric's hands found a stone, not a weapon worthy of story, just a fist-sized piece of the mountain with mud on it. The man lunged. Alaric swung. The stone cracked against his wrist. The knife fell. The man cursed and slammed into him, driving the air from his lungs. Pain burst through his ribs. They rolled in wet leaves. Somewhere Kavra shouted his name. The bandit was stronger. Of course he was. Alaric had never requested fair odds from life, and saw no reason life would begin offering them in a ditch. The man got a hand around his throat. Alaric drove his thumb into the wrist he had already struck, grabbed his own cedar-handled awl from his belt with the other hand, and pressed the point under the man's jaw. He did not stab. He did not want to kill. His hand shook hard enough that perhaps he could not have if he tried, but he pressed until the bandit froze. "I am having," Alaric rasped, "a very difficult week." The man's eyes flicked past him. Whatever he saw there drained the blood from his face. Ruska lifted him away from Alaric by the back of his coat and slammed him into a birch. Once, efficiently, he dropped bonelessly at her feet. She looked down at Alaric, breathing hard, rain on her face, copper hair plastered to her cheeks. Her eyes went to the awl in his hand, then to the bandit's bleeding wrist, then back to him. "Huh," she said. Alaric lay in the mud, gasping. "Was that approval?" "Do not grow proud." "I wouldn't dare." "You used tool." "It was nearby." "You did not beg." "I was busy." Ruska crouched, and for the first time her expression held no mockery at all. She touched 2 fingers to the place over her heart, then flicked them outward toward him. "Good." The word struck him with ridiculous force. He had been praised in his life for tidy columns, clean repairs, punctual deliveries, polite refusals. He had not often been praised for the small, stubborn ember in him that refused to go out. From Ruska, who seemed to ration respect as if winter might take it, the word felt heavier than coin. Kavra arrived then, eyes sharp with fury that vanished into relief so quickly he nearly missed it. She checked his throat, his ribs, his face. Her hand lingered at his jaw. "I told you stay." "I did. Initially. Alaric. I was attacked while obeying. I feel that should count in my favor." Nemi appeared through the mist, bow lowered. He held. Kavra looked at the unconscious bandit, then at the awl. Her thumb brushed mud from Alaric's cheek, a gesture so intimate and practical that his breath caught for reasons unrelated to strangulation. "He held," she agreed. After that, Ruska stopped calling him Narrow Man every time. Not entirely. She was not transformed by one muddy scuffle into a poet of tenderness. But sometimes she used his name. Alaric, when the path turned. Alaric, catch. Alaric, your knot is embarrassing. It was alarming how quickly he learned to hear the difference. They reached the winter hunting ground at dusk on the 5th day. It lay where the forest opened into a high meadow, ringed by black pines and stone outcrops, with 3 hide shelters tucked against the wind and a smoke hole built cleverly between rocks. Snow still clung in shaded hollows. The sky above was vast and pale, the first stars pricking through like all holes in dark leather. The place was not the clan hearth Kavra had mentioned, but it held traces of many hands. Carved posts marked the edge of the meadow, each wrapped with strips of dyed cloth and hung with small offerings. Feathers, beads, a child's carved deer, a broken knife polished clean. Nemi touched 2 fingers to one post as she passed. Ruska bowed her head to another, so briefly Alaric might have missed it had he not been watching. Ancestors. He asked Kavra. Some, not all. Those who saved lives here, those whose debts began or ended, those who were found when lost. He looked at the cloth strips moving in the wind. You mark that? We mark what changes breath. That night they gave him a place inside the largest shelter, near the fire but not too near the smoke. Kavra brewed a tea that tasted like bark having regrets. Ruska roasted strips of venison and watched him eat with the intensity of a woman evaluating livestock, though by then he understood this was partly how she cared. Nemi took his coat and repaired a tear in the sleeve with stitches, so neat his mother would have approved, and then pretended not to notice when he stared. You sew, he said. She glanced up. Cloth opens, I close it. That is one description of sewing. Your sleeve complained. My sleeve and I are grateful. She tied off the thread with her teeth. The firelight caught on her tusks, small and pale. You keep gratitude like debt. Humans do that. Do you want to? The question sat between them. Kavra and Ruska were outside checking the horses they had apparently hidden 2 valleys over, because Orc planning operated on levels he was beginning to accept he would never fully grasp. Rain ticked softly against hide. The shelter smelled of smoke, leather, herbs, and Nemi's hair, which was faintly sweet like crushed wintergreen. I don't know, he said. Good answer. Is it? It is true. She handed him the repaired coat. Their fingers touched. Her skin was warmer than his. She did not pull away immediately. Neither did he. The charged moments did not announce themselves like horns. They arrived in small misplacements of breath. Kavra standing behind him to show him how to notch a trail sign in bark, her arms bracketing his, her voice at his ear explaining that a mark cut too deep invited rot. Ruska leaning over him to correct his grip on a short spear, her hand closing around his wrist, her grin sharp when he managed not to flinch. Nemi sitting beside him in companionable silence while he oiled the awl, close enough that their shoulders touched whenever the wind pressed the shelter wall inward. His body noticed them, because his body was alive and not blind. Their strength, the grace of them, the easy confidence with which they occupied space, all of it worked on him in ways he considered deeply unfair. But desire was the least confusing part once he admitted it existed. Desire, at least, had familiar symptoms. The stranger thing was how safe he began to feel while surrounded by people who could break him accidentally. Safety had never been soft for him. It had been locked doors, balanced accounts, predictable meals, the absence of shouting. This was different. This was Ruska dropping a brace of rabbits at his feet and saying, "Your hands no small bones. Help." This was Kavra asking him what his mother's voice sounded like as if the answer mattered. This was Nemi noticing he rubbed his thumb over the ledger cover when anxious and placing a cup of tea beside him without comment. On the 7th night, they invited him to a debt fire. He thought at first it was simply dinner with more ceremony. He had learned not to underestimate Orc ceremony after watching Ruska spend 20 minutes arranging 3 stones around a cooking pit, because, as Kavra explained, 1 stone remembered the hunter, 1 the hunted, and 1 the hunger between them. Human meals suddenly seemed rude by comparison. The debt fire was built at the center of the meadow beneath the carved posts. Kavra washed her hands in snowmelt. Ruska painted a dark line across her own brow with ash. Nemi gave Alaric a strip of blue cloth and showed him how to tie it around his wrist. I do not know what I am agreeing to, he said. Listening. Nemi said, only listening. For now. For now has become a suspicious phrase. She looked at him, and there was humor in her storm-grey eyes. Yes. The 3 women stood around the fire. Alaric sat on a flat stone because his ribs still objected to prolonged dignity. Kavra spoke first in Orcish. The language moved low and rough, full of sounds that seemed shaped by the back of the throat and the chest. Ruska answered, shorter, fierce even in ritual. Nemi's voice, when it came, was softer, but carried farther than he expected, as if the meadow leaned in to hear her. Then Kavra switched to common for him. We speak the debt so it does not grow crooked in shadow. We found Alaric Ven on Black Pine Road, blooded but holding name. We broke the hands that would have ended him. His breath continued because our breath moved. This binds us. Ruska lifted a coal with iron tongs and dropped it into a bowl of water. Steam hissed. Death bit. We broke its tooth. Nemi tied a knot in a cord and held it up. Breath crossed, not yet woven. Kavra looked at him. In old law we could demand service. In older law we could keep all we saved. We do neither. Thistle Moon law says a life returned must be invited, not caged. We offer hearth. We offer namespace. We offer the making of future if future is wanted. Seed and name, oath and kin, children by body or by bond. We ask you to learn before you answer." Alaric sat very still. The phrase that had first struck him like a hammer now unfolded into something larger and more difficult to dismiss. Not simple, not safe in the way Halliford's counting house would have been safe, but not the crude demand his panic had made of it. They were not asking for a night. They were not asking for use. They were asking whether the life they had pulled from the mud might be joined to theirs in a way that made more life, more names, more memory. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was, he realized with a slow pressure beneath his breastbone, generous. "What happens if I say no?" he asked. Kavra did not blink. "We take you to Halliford when you heal. Debt remains honored by truth spoken and offer refused. No shame if refusal is clean." Ruska made a face, but when he looked at her, she said, "No shame. Some annoyance. Yours. Mine. Understandable." Nemi stepped forward and placed the knotted cord in his palm. "A no can be clean. A yes can be false. We listen for the difference." His throat tightened. "And if I don't know?" Kavra's gaze held him steadily. "Then you do not answer." It should have been a relief. It was, partly, but it also removed the last simple defense he had. He could not tell himself he was trapped. He could not tell himself fear was the same as refusal. He could not tell himself they were monsters from old stories, because monsters did not give a man room to be honest. After the debt fire, he dreamed of his father's shop, not as it had been at the end, with dust on the counter and creditors at the door, but as it had been when he was 8 and the world was measured in shavings, lamplight, and the tap of his father's mallet. His mother sat by the window, writing in the ledger, lips moving silently as numbers became order. His father held up the cedar awl and said, "A tool is a promise, Alaric. You use it to join what would otherwise come apart." He woke before dawn with tears on his face and a fury at himself so old it felt inherited. He slipped from the shelter without waking anyone, or thought he did. The meadow lay blue under early light. Frost silvered the grass. He walked to the edge where the carved posts stood and gripped one until the cold bit his palms. Nemi found him. Of course it was Nemi. She did not ask if he was well. He appreciated that. No one crying before sunrise beside memorial posts was well, and pretending otherwise wasted everyone's time. "My father made doors," he said, though she had not asked. "Good ones, strong ones. He used to say a house began with how it opened." Nemi stood beside him, close but not touching. "Good saying." "I left for the militia when I was 20 because I wanted to be more than a man sanding door frames in a town that smelled of cabbage and rain. I came back with a scar, a limp when it gets cold, and no idea how to talk to him. He died before I learned. My mother kept the shop 2 years after. I helped. Poorly. Then she died too, and I sold most of it because debt doesn't care about grief. I kept the ledger and the awl because apparently I enjoy carrying ghosts in useful forms." The words kept coming. Once they began, he could not make them stop. He told her about the winter his mother coughed blood into a handkerchief and still corrected his sums. About the day he packed the shop sign away because he could not bear to see Ven and Son above a door that opened to strangers. About Halliford, the safe stool, the cousin who meant well and wrote as if a man could fold himself small enough to fit any available corner. "I was going to let the name end quietly," he said. "Not dramatically, not in a tragedy, just put it down somewhere no one would trip over it. I thought that was mercy. For whom I don't know." Nemi's breath made a white cloud in the cold. She was silent so long that he wondered if he had given her too much. Then she reached out and touched the blue cloth still tied around his wrist. Behind him, Kavra's voice came softly. "Alaric." He turned and found all 3 of them at the edge of the meadow. Kavra stood with her hands open at her sides, giving him the right to step away even now. Ruska looked as if she wanted to fight whatever had hurt him, and hated that memory had no throat. Nemi remained beside him, her fingers still around his wrist, steady as a knot that had not yet been pulled tight. "I am tired of roads that only lead away," Alaric said. "I was going to Halliford because it was a place to put down my name, where no one would ask what it weighed. A desk, a stool, a safe little corner. I thought that was enough." Kavra came closer by one careful step. "And now? Now I am still afraid. I am not suddenly wise because 3 terrifying women fed me stew and corrected my knots." Ruska's mouth twitched. The knots needed correction. They did. He looked down at the loose debt cord around his wrist, then at the ledger under his arm. "But I understand something I did not understand when you first said the words. My seed and my name are not a price you are collecting. They are a future you are asking me whether I want to help make. Children, perhaps, one day, if love and time ask it honestly. Or oath, or a hearth that remembers my people beside yours. Not a cage, a door." Nemi's thumb moved once over his pulse. "Doors must be opened from inside." He laughed under his breath, and it came out almost like a sob. "Exactly." Kavra stopped before him. Her amber eyes held no triumph, only hope disciplined by respect. "Then what is your answer, Alaric Ven?" The forest seemed to listen. "I will not go to Halliford," he said. "Not because I cannot, because I choose not to. I choose to stay long enough for this answer to grow roots. I choose to learn your hearth laws from the hearth, not from fear. I choose to give my name to be carried, not owned, and to carry yours if you will teach me how. As for the rest—" His face warmed, but he did not look away. "The rest should come only when all of us can speak it cleanly." Ruska made a rough sound and turned sharply toward the trees. "Good. If you had chosen the desk, I would have had to respect it and be furious forever. How generous of you. Very." Nemi untied the loose debt cord, smoothed it between her fingers, and tied it again with one loop left open. "Not finished," she said. "No," Alaric agreed. "Begun." Kavra offered her palm, and he placed his own inside it. Her fingers closed, warm and careful. "Life held," she said. "Hearth learning?" He tried. Ruska snorted. "Complaining hearth learning. Beloved, perhaps?" Nemi said. The word landed so softly that it undid him more than ceremony could have. They had found him in mud and blood, clutching a name he had thought no one wanted. They had not taken it from him. They had made room beside their own. He stepped forward and touched his brow to Kavra's, then Ruska's, then Nemi's. There would be time to decide what yes meant in full. Time for fear to speak and be answered. Time for laughter, anger, repairs, letters south. Children, perhaps. Perhaps not. And names carved only when the heart was ready. That night, it was enough that he walked back to the fire with them, instead of towards the road. Some lives arrive by careful plan, measured like timber and joined at clean angles. Others come out of the trees with impossible faces and a truth too large to understand at first hearing. Courage is not always the sword raised or the road conquered. Sometimes it is the frightened hand that stops reaching for the old map and accepts the door opening where no door was supposed to be. Belonging, when it finally finds the lost, may look nothing like safety at first. It may look like 3 green-skinned huntresses beside a fire, saying your name as if it was never meant to be carried alone.